Check the mic, check the mic, check it, 1, 2, 3. Let's see how we are doing. 6 games this Saturday evening, couple games going already. Someone just asked me, is there a show today? I'm live, bitches. I assume someone will make that clear shortly in our premium Slack chat. But let's see. Checked a couple times and was assured that I was all set up. Josh Engelman, you have betrayed me horribly. There was no tweet. So we will sit tight for just a moment as I find a tweet to retweet. If you're watching the show, go ahead and tweet the show at me. And when I get a link, I will retweet the link, and then we will get underway in earnest. I shall now bother Josh. Oh well, no one's tweeting anything at me. I suppose I will trundle off into YouTube by myself and find it manually and send it out. People are telling me the audio is good, which is nice, but it's not as useful as giving me the tweet. No? Still? Okay. Here we go. Venturing into YouTube. You want something done? You gotta do it yourself. Live now. Good. Take that. And find it manually and send it out. Copy that. My wife's been using a computer for, 25 years, and she still, goes right click, drag down, copy, right click, drag down, paste, which really cracks me up. Alright, there we go. I have tweeted the show. So we are rounding into form. Thank you, Isabel on Twitter for getting there. Oh, a couple people did it. I will like your tweets. But you took too damn long. Well, there may be some sort of delay. Okay, let's get into this slate. We have 6 games going this evening. Our first contest coming at lock with nothing else coming for at least an hour later, which is relevant in your construction. We talk about this not that much. But let's say you're playing on a non-late swap site, which these days is mostly FanDuel, and you want to play either, say, Al Horford or Nikola Vucevic in your center spots. They are a tier down from what they would project alone, based purely on the fact that, or rather, if you're playing on a late swap site, rather. So anywhere but FanDuel, they are slightly worse than they would project at. So let's say you're looking at, say, $5,600 for Al Horford, who again I think you can still throw in as a power forward. But playing guys in the early game is not just bad, because in this case the early game is not the most attractive DFS environment to look at, but also the fact you lock up more spots to be able to deal with late swap later, which could be not great for you depending on whether or not we get news on Karl Anthony Towns or Devin Booker, who I don't expect to play, but there's some shot that happens, and what happens with the 3 questionable guys on the Nuggets and all that. So It is worth pointing out that there is a downgrade to playing guys in late swap who lock early that is proportional to basically the number of guys on the slate with some questionable nature to their games. But in any case, we have this early game. We have Boston and Orlando. Just checking. Okay, no news, so I can go back to my original notes on this contest. As always, everything is site dependent when you're looking for prices for guys. Evan Fournier for the Magic. We like the fact that they're at home. Has been surprisingly successful his last couple games against the Celtics. When they played earlier this year, these two teams, you had the rare situation where you had 2 point assist double-doubles on the same team. You had Fournier and Augustine both get point assist double doubles on the same team, which again is pretty rare, and even rare when you're dealing with a team the quality of the Boston Celtics. But, that price has obviously come down to a pretty low number. Now, that's not for no reason. Again, if you look at his last contest, we saw one of the absolute worst games of the year out of Evan Fournier, who managed to play, I think it was 36 minutes and have 3 fantasy points. That's almost impossible to do. But more frequently, his scoring ends up being in the 15 to 25 point range. But certainly a possibility in GPPs. I do prefer Dennis Schroeder at $4,700 on DraftKings. In either cash or tournaments. He's not quite a cash play, but not horrible because he is just really underpriced, and obviously the matchup's a little more attractive. But still, Fournier at $4,700. If I'm building 150 lineups, that's a guy I'd have some piece of. I don't hate DJ Augustine in more of a cashy concept. Again, the matchup isn't great. FanDuel 4,500. I would rather still have DeAnthony Melton at approximately the same price. They're both still in that droppable range, but not out of play there. Vooch 9,500 on FanDuel. That's cheaper. 8,800 on DK. That's obviously less expensive. Again, you are fighting the slight inherent downgrade to playing early guys on a late swap there, but those prices both make it, possible he's exceptional in tournaments, but it's tough with possible Karl Anthony Towns, Jokic obviously in a monster spot, Ayton who ends up being a lot cheaper, Gobert who ends up being cheaper, guys like Willie Cauley-Stein or the value guys on the Nuggets. There's just a lot of other good centers, and again, not an ideal price for Vooch, who has been remarkably consistent, but almost to a fault when we're looking at him in a tournament concept. Where he's doesn't really spike massive upside games, and you need the possibility of that when you're paying $9,000-$10,000 for somebody. So I don't hate Vooch if he ended up in your cash lineup, but it's still not going to be one of my top 5 favorite tournament centers, even at that price. Looking across the ball at the Celtics, Kyrie on FanDuel is still too cheap now, 8,300, been floating in that 83 to 85 price for a while. The way FanDuel is priced, that's almost $1,000 too cheap. He's appropriately 8,700 on DraftKings, and that would translate to low 9s on FanDuel. So that is a discount if you're looking at one player from this game. Probably the first one, certainly on FanDuel that I'm looking at. Same thing with Marcus Morris. With him back, we can expect him to be getting his 30 minutes again. 4,800 is too cheap. I do expect him to be less popular than, say, Josh Jackson for only a few $100s more. Makes a pretty solid tournament pivot for that reason. Talking about the back-to-backs today real quick. I want to... Well, actually, I lost my notes, so I'm going to have to go get it from the horse's mouth. So everyone's going to wait a second because I don't want to get this wrong. So let's talk about the back-to-backs real quick. Don't want to get it incorrect. So here we go. The Hornets played last night. The Bulls played last night. The Nuggets play again tomorrow, which is a consideration with them being maybe a little faster to pull guys out if they get up big on the Suns, which people getting up big on the Suns, something that happens with a reasonable amount of frequency. The Timberwolves played last night. That's, of course, very relevant for the status of Karl Anthony Towns. The Magic do play again tomorrow. And the Jazz played last night. So there we go. Had to go back and look it up, but didn't want to leave it out as we are going. So, again, Kyrie here makes a lot of sense. You can obviously fire a tournament bullet at Marcus Smart or Jason Tatum. Al Horford's still more of a cash play for me. Not a good spot. Hasn't been historically great against the Magic, against Vooch. And they've improved, and he's improved defensively this year. They're at home, so I don't have a problem if your random cash build led you to $5,600 Horford who's getting back to closing on 30 minutes again in it. But, again, not a guy I'm super anxious to try to take this shot at in tournaments. Same thing, you could play a Gordon Hayward. Probably prefer Jaylen Brown to most of those guys in tournaments just because we have seen the upside a couple times recently and the price is really low and there's a couple different ways he gets there. But on the whole, this entire first game, not really an environment that you should feel compelled to get yourself a piece of. We have 2 8 p.m. games. I wanted to look this up today. My guess is Karl Anthony Towns plays, and that is simply because I think he's the current consecutive games played leader in the NBA. He has not missed a game in his career. So I imagine he's lobbying pretty hard for, hey, give me some time, we'll see how it goes. I imagine he's at least trying to get on the court and give it a start. He has to be aware. Tristan Thompson was the consecutive guy for a while, then he lost it. Somewhere in there it was Corey Brewer, and somewhere in there it was Mason Plumlee, but they all dropped off. So I think at this point, someone, if you know perchance, let me know. But I think Karl Anthony Towns is the current consecutive games played and has never missed a game in his entire career. This is his fourth year. I believe they played 82 games each of the first 3 seasons. Occasionally you miss one for scheduling, but I have no reason to think in their... I was just looking at the standings. This is their 42nd or 43rd game of the year. So he's played 280 some odd consecutive games. So just for that, and the fact he was able to return last night, I imagine he goes out there and gives it a go. And I couldn't blame anyone for considering, if we get news that he is playing and is starting and won't have a minutes restriction, and there's not, beat reporters coming out saying he looks bulky or something like that. I couldn't fault anyone for giving it a chance. I would probably rather play Nikola Jokic for the $500 to $1,000 more that he is currently priced at, just because I don't see a reason to necessarily take a shot at the uncertainty. But obviously the upside is certainly there. I would have some, certainly if I was building any quantity of lineups. Wouldn't be in the first lineup, but would certainly be in the first 5 or so. That is Towns. Let's entertain the notion for a second that Towns is out. You would probably end up wanting as much Gorgui Dieng as possible. I imagine they would slide him into the starting lineup. I've seen him play live a few times, even back through college, where I think he was at Louisville, or Louisville, as they say if you come from that area of town. And then, a very good fantasy point per minute basketball player. And better than that, actually. And Pelicans is a great matchup, so he would become a stellar play in cash and tournaments, and somebody that I think we would certainly want to jump on. Let's see. But yeah, I've a lot of people right now talking about Towns for cash. I'm gonna need a strong advocacy from him or someone on the training staff or the team till I think he's a better cash option than, Towns or Jokic or Davis or Jokic or some of the other high-priced big options or Vooch even in cash, with him having sort of a bum ankle. That's just me. Might be 100%, but I don't think there's a reason to risk it on one of your most expensive players. I just see people in the premium Slack chat talking about him for cash, and that seems like a bad idea. So in the event he's out again, Gorgui Dieng, we just talked about that. Obviously makes a ton of sense. Next guy we're probably going to look at would be Andrew Wiggins. Just has obviously looked much better in the few games since Saunders took over coaching the team. Just would be looking at more shots, more usage, more everything. Gorgui, not a big offensive usage guy, so a lot of that would flow to Wiggins. He'd get pretty chalky, but with good reason in a matchup we certainly like. And Teague as well there. I really, the Pelicans give up a lot of assists is a weird way to put it, but they provide point guards with a very safe floor and some sort of upside. Off the top of my head, they played twice so far this year against the Pelicans, for example. In one game, Teague started and had a good game with double-digit assists. In the other game, Tyus Jones started and had a good game with double-digit assists. So I would certainly have some sort of appeal there for the point guards. Checking on some news just a little bit. Yeah, Al Horford cleared to play 30 minutes today. That's obviously, a bit of a feather in his cap if you wanted to go there. So 5,600 on DK, that is a little bit too cheap. So Josh Okogie, not out of play at $10 on Yahoo. Not out of play at 4,200 either side on FanDuel or DraftKings. It seems most likely he'll get about 24 minutes. There is some upside for some more there. He'd obviously also be a little bit better if Towns is out, just because minutes flow down a little bit. Same thing with Taj Gibson and Dario Saric. It's the same situation when you have Giannis out, for example, that there's just a lot of usage and time that flows to guys. But Dario Saric is only 41 on FanDuel. You would end up seeing Taj get some time at the 5. He would get more minutes. So everyone's going to get a bit of a cookie, certainly among the bigs. But Wiggins and Jang, the first couple guys you want to look at. Then for me, probably Teague. Then probably Dario slightly over Taj, depending on what their prices are. I would still like Taj a little bit more, so it would depend exactly how much cheaper you were getting Dario than Taj. Dealing with a couple chat messages real quick. Please stand by. All right, let's get back to it. So let's talk about the Pelicans. So Mirotic came back last game, played 20 minutes off the bench. Presume that comes up a little bit more here. I don't think that it's likely he plays more than about 24 minutes tonight. So at 6,000, that's probably still someone I'm not going to take a shot at. He would need to be obviously obscenely productive, and basically all hands are on deck for this game. Though I think each one more is questionable. I don't think we know if each one is going to suit up yet. Someone tweet at me or message me if I got that wrong somehow. But so now with Mirotic back, that takes a little bit away from everybody. Now prices have started to fall and become a little bit more reasonable, but excepting maybe Alfred, that takes a little bit away from everyone. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the guys here. Yeah, Derrick Rose isn't going to play. Okay, so Derrick Rose being out again helps a good bit there. That news came in nicely on time there. So Derrick Rose won't play. Sorry, bit of news I don't think I actually mentioned, but Derrick Rose won't play. Still don't want to do the whole Tyus Jones thing, especially on FanDuel where his price is overly inflated there. Still just basically going to play the backup to Teague, but should be more minutes again for Josh Okogie. So again, that Yahoo price is pretty exceptional, and it's a great matchup. Certainly makes sense as a punt drop on FanDuel at 4,200. Apparently Towns in, we are getting the news, which again, I'm not surprised. That is what I expected. All right, and if you are, looking to play Karl Anthony Towns, this is news, 100 minutes in advance of lock, so he's not that close to being out. So, certainly a little more confident. I still, just a guy who sprained an ankle yesterday and cost 10K is not something I want to do in cash. He is objectively too cheap. Points per dollar, he's a little bit better than Jokic. He's a little bit better than Vooch. For me in cash, I'm not taking that chance. But ruled in 100 minutes in advance, Karl Anthony Towns is absolutely fine to run out there in some tournaments. It's a superb matchup. Has done fine against Brow in the past and still expressed some sort of upside. Same thing with Brow, vice versa. So getting back to talking about the Pellies for a bit. And again, anything you're wondering that I don't get to, I will take as many questions as I can, which is why I'm kind of speeding through this. Drew Holiday, DraftKings down to 7,800. Now makes a sort of interesting cash play. For tournaments, I'm a little more interested in the upside you can get out of, Donovan Mitchell and other guys. It's not that he doesn't have upside, but again, with all hands on deck for this Pelicans team in what's not that great of a matchup, probably looking elsewhere. I like Elfrid Payton in tournaments. Again, mostly the DraftKings price. I don't recall what he is on Yahoo, but I know FanDuel is like $1,000 more. I'll look elsewhere. Rather run Teague there. But one of the DK lineups I was looking at earlier today was a stack of this game, and I had both Teague and Elfrid, both of whom I like here. Elf has his full upside in that he could play 35, 36 minutes. No reason to think he couldn't if this game stays close. He's always possibly got one of those low-end upside games, and it's a spot I do like for him. So Elf, after Anthony Davis, probably my favorite of these guys. Julius Randle now, all being even, probably isn't going to play more than 27, 28 minutes. So that obviously puts a ceiling on what you can get out of him. There's the Anthony Davis out games in which he's a must-play monster, and at $8,000 you think he's going to get, 35 minutes and 50-something fantasy points. There's the Everyone's in there except for Mirotic games, in which he still frequently got himself into the 30s. When Mirotic comes back and gets his role, last game, I want to say Randall played 27 or 28 minutes and could have gotten a couple more outside of a blowout. But this game I'd have him projected for about 28 minutes, so it's starting to get a little more difficult to get there. You have Townsend, which, again, would have been an upgrade for him if Towns had been out, so Julius Randle has enough upside that playing him in tournaments is right, but even at 7,300, which feels a little cheap, not a guy I would go at in cash, and again, for the FanDuel price at 8,200, I would probably look at some other centers there. And Anthony Davis is a monster. Right now, I am projected for 1 fantasy point more than Russell Westbrook. So again, this is going to have something to do with ownership as we come towards lock. Right now, we have them almost identical. And Towns, by the way, we have 5 guys at 20% or more, and no one at over 24%. And 3 of the guys we have there are Towns, Davis, and Westbrook. So, yep, assuming that's about correct, and I do think that should be about the number. I will go with Anthony Davis over Big Russ at this point. And again, some pretty negative correlation between him and kind of everyone on the team outside of Elf. So if you have Anthony Davis, I would be disinclined to also play, say, Julius Randle. In the event Etuan Moore doesn't play, you can get cute with like $3,400 Darius Miller if you want. He would probably then play 28 minutes or something, but certainly not somebody I would prioritize. Let's go on to the other 8 p.m. game, running it back, the Spurs at the Thunder. Again, they played this game the day before yesterday because it was the one day I've been off in the last 10 days or so. And it was massive, and the game went to double overtime, and many players were good, and many blocks were busted in this blockbuster. Let's talk about, so again, and a healthy over-under between two teams with what I consider to be very, efficient offenses here. But they both play at a fast enough pace at this point that they both rank in like the top 10 in fantasy points allowed. So it isn't a positive game script for anybody, but combined with the pace, it's just fine. My guess is there's a little bit of lingering ownership on some of these guys based on that performance. Like I think I'm curious what we have, for example, like Terrence Ferguson ownership at. Right, okay, it currently says 2%. That's good, but that's 2% too high. I can't describe how much you would have to pay me to get me to play Terrence Ferguson. He is not good. There is not, it was great. He had a great game. He made 7 3-pointers, and that was it. It was literally all of his fantasy points in 40 minutes. He's not going to get 40 minutes. He's not going to take 12 3-pointers. He's not going to make 7 3-pointers. He ended up with whatever that is, 22 on FanDuel, 25 on DraftKings. Pretty sure those are his season highs or very, very close to it. So people are like, yeah, I like him as a tournament pivot over Royce. I don't think, he outscores Royce O'Neal maybe 20% of the time, and then it's because Royce is utter dog shit. So, and at that point, you want to pick guys with some sort of greater upside. So anyhow, I've had 2 Turd Ferguson questions today, which is 2 Turd Ferguson questions too many. He is never the answer. Other guys on this team, Westbrook, again, I have projected into the 60s in an absolutely fine spot. The price is not particularly friendly here, obviously. 12.4 on FanDuel, 11.8 on DK for being projected slightly lower and a little hangover ownership based on that last double overtime game, liking a lot of other point guard plays, liking Anthony Davis a little more. I'm more inclined towards Anthony Davis, but there's absolutely no incorrect amount of Russell Westbrook. This is a team that, going against the Spurs, they are much more susceptible to coming in at the 1 than, say, coming in at the wings or at center. So not a spot that I love for Steven Adams. You probably don't get 2 overtimes. He is a little bit banged up. I have no issue with Paul George. I like Paul George as a leverage play off Russell Westbrook, and he has a very safe floor. But if you went back and I don't remember what it was in that game, but I remember he was fine. I think he had 48 fantasy points in 47 minutes in that double overtime game, which I would project him for better than that. I like him for more than that's basically a fantasy point a minute. And if you don't have Westbrook, I think he's just great. but on the whole, I don't look at his $9,500, $9,700 price and think it's great, which is interesting. A lot of people tell me they, project him for a butt ton here, and I think it's a perfectly fine spot, but around average, and his price is still towards the ceiling we've seen it at. So I guess just a lot of ambivalency for me on Paul George. Certainly a chance you randomly pull the 60 out here, and again, I like him most in a lineup where you don't have Russell Westbrook. Jeremy Grant, again, without the overtimes, more of a cash play. But again, 5,300, 5,400, probably would just let that go. Dennis Schroeder, the other guy I'm really interested in here. 5,200 on FanDuel. In play in tournaments, certainly. Depending on a couple other plays, I think if Gary Harris is willing to go, I slightly prefer him around 5K. There are some other plays around that price. I want to double check because I'm just going to click over to FanDuel real quick. So I don't mind punting with Josh Okogie. Again, obviously, with no Robert Covington and Derrick Rose not playing, that makes a lot of sense. I don't mind switching off that in tournaments to Jaylen Brown. So just, I would end up with some tournament exposure to Dennis Schroeder. But a lot of low-priced point guards there that I like more. On DraftKings 4,700, that's a really good price. Clearly some chance that he can, bang out 35, which he gives you, once a week or so. You randomly get that game where he ends up taking 18, 19 shots instead of 10, 12 shots and just has a big game. Inversely correlated with Westbrook. So again, a little better if you have Davis in there or other studs in there. But Schroeder at 4,700, just objectively a little too cheap, and I do think he has a good game again sometime soon. Let's go ahead and look at the Spurs. I do prefer Aldridge to DeRozan at their current prices. I don't have a problem with DeRozan. But, the price, he's over 9 on FanDuel, still a bit over 8 on DraftKings. Sees a fair bit of Paul George defense in this spot. Unsurprisingly, you had Aldridge put up the better number in that last game. And you would think that was the case whether or not he's operating at the 4 or the 5. Has enough of a range game that he can deal to some degree with the oppressive Adams defense when that ends up being a factor. So like Aldridge a little bit more than DeRozan, but no one here is priced obscenely well, and I do think the ownerships are swollen a little bit, so I would mitigate my exposure a fair amount. Derek White has come back from the stupid high price they gave him on FanDuel for a while. He and Bryn Forbes are roughly as appealing to me. I don't have any interest in Patty Mills. He randomly got all the extra time in that last game. That was just he was playing well off the bench, and so he got 10 minutes of overtime. But he ended with, I want to say, 29 minutes, and he has been playing literally almost exactly 19 minutes a game for some significant number of games in a row before that. So you saw the 30 minutes against OKC, and he ended up getting a lot of time as well against Memphis. Maybe that ends up being something they stick with, but again, in regulation, he was going back to getting the exactly 19 minutes they had been getting for 5 or 6 games in a row there. So I would probably prefer playing Bryn Forbes or Derek White. I think Pop's druthers is to give those guys their 30 minutes a night. And again, both sites, main sites, you end up having $1,000 more for Derek White. I'm generally more inclined to pay that. He has been playing a little over his head. He's just been shooting, 75% from the field for the last couple of weeks. He had that string of, 80% from the field games that were just ridiculous. But shooting totals over the last X games, 4 of 6, 8 of 9, 8 of 11, 8 of 9, 4 of 7, 4 of 7, 10 of 17 in that massive overtime game. So more than 50% from the field in 7 games in a row, especially for a guy playing the point. That's pretty outstanding. And while he's quite good, and I like him, and I've been talking about him since Summer League, he's not the best point guard ever. So that shooting is going to regress a little bit. Priced in the 5s, there's still an upside there, but I would rather run Elfrid Payton, for example. And Bryn Forbes, again, just another sort of shooting guard cheap guy. I would rather run Dennis Schroeder. So let's see. Any more news? Steven Adams is in and will start. Okay, that is what we expected. He's a tough dude. Rest of this team... Pau Gasol has played 16 to 20 minutes the last couple games. Started the last game on the back end of a back-to-back. This is an island game for the Spurs. They didn't play yesterday. They don't play tomorrow. It's $3,100 on DraftKings. I don't know if he shot in that last game, but in 20 minutes, I project Pau Gasol for 22, 23 DraftKings points. So I don't love him. You don't need to windmill slam him into anything, but I do think he's probably my favorite $3,100 or less player on DraftKings. I'll put it that way. So, someone I would be tempted with. And again, DraftKings are waiting for news. So if he doesn't get the start, have plans and have some options. But E'Twaun Moore is in. Thank you very much. So don't play Darius if you had him in your lineup. And E'Twaun is reasonable in tournaments. He's going to play close to 30 minutes. And this is certainly an environment conducive to some fantasy points. So probably still prefer Schroeder, for example, in the same range. But, another guy who would be in play. I'd prefer him to Fournier, probably. All right, let's go on to game number 4 of the evening. The Suns are at home. Suns are at home hosting the Nuggets. Lots of news up in the air for Denver. Gary Harris is questionable. Will Barton is questionable to not make his debut so much, but play his first game in a couple months. And Trey Lyles, not an incredibly relevant bit of news, but also questionable himself, and does, in theory, add a couple more minutes around and gives us some more appeal for guys like, say, Juancho, if we're looking for some interesting plays out of this game. So this is the game. I would want news on more than any other game of the evening. This is, going into Phoenix is about as good as it's going to get. These two teams have played twice already this year. Once in Denver, where Denver destroyed the Suns, and literally no one on the Suns was good. And one time in Phoenix before, where they had a pretty competitive game. And you actually got some decent players out of the Suns, where you had 40-something out of T.J. Warren and like 50-something. You may have had DeAndre Ayton's best game of the year in that game. I will look that up when I get a second. But you actually had a decent game there, and that was the game in Phoenix, so that gives us a little more hope. If we were in Denver, again, teams traveling to Denver is a bit of a thing. And Denver is a very good defense at this point. I would have some concern there. So, let's talk about the Suns first. It's a little bit easier, actually. Devin Booker is doubtful. I doubt they play him. We don't know that, and again, try not to set yourself up by stacking too many Suns. Stacking too many Suns is probably a bad idea anyway. It's site dependent. You have, FanDuel, or a couple guys are too cheap. I can see a lot of people getting to both Melton and Josh Jackson on FanDuel. But, outside of that, these guys are not overly well priced, and the Nuggets are a really quality defense. So, just something to keep in mind in the back of your head. But I assume Devin Booker won't play. They've rushed him back from injury at least twice that I can remember, where, they brought him back and then, he pulls a hammy 3 quarters into his first game back. So hopefully with him being the face of the franchise and the potential to be, an all-NBA player, they took it a little easy on him this time. Mirotic playing around 25 minutes. Yeah, that's again, he played 20 last game. I had 24 in the projection I drew up earlier today. So 25 sounds about right. $6,000 against the Timberwolves, it could happen. You like him coming off the bench, but I'd be pretty deep before I went back there with all hands on deck. No minutes limit on E'Twaun Moore. Yeah, that's also what I would expect with the way Gentry tends to do that. So I think their over plan, what they'd like to have happen each game is to get somewhere around 30 minutes out of DeAnthony Melton at this point. Now it's going to be a little up in the air with blowouts potentially. It's going to be a little up in the air with foul trouble. He only played 25 minutes last game, but that was in fouling out. He's going to play about 30 minutes. So he's still 4,400 on FanDuel, where he could be dropped if shit goes crazy. Pretty solid cash game play. I like him more than Augustine. I like him more than the other cash game plays in that area. And certainly there's enough upside in tournaments where I do think the ownership is artificially kept a little lower because of Kyrie's excellent price and a number of people wanting to play Westbrook. I like Jamal Murray across the ball. There's a number of decent point guard plays. So I suppose I endorse Melton in just about anything you want to drop him into. We've seen McCall Bridges obviously cede some playing time and usage to Kelly Oubre over the last few games. You're still generally getting the ceremonial start out of him, but when we're getting 22, 23 minutes, which is what he's gotten the last couple games instead of 30, he's at best a tournament punt, and he's not super upside anyway. We've gotten a couple games recently where he can play 30 minutes and get 12, 15 fantasy points. Now we're dealing with the threat of him playing only 22, 23 minutes against a decent defense. I don't have a problem. If I have 150 lineups, I have 2 or 3 McCall Bridges, but it'd be lower than probably the amount of Kelly Oubre I have, who, again, the price on FanDuel is now jumped up to a not terribly reasonable $4,900. I saw the price on Yahoo came up. I can't recall the exact number offhand. $4,400 on DK, the most appealing of those numbers. But yeah, not a lot to add other than I doubt we can say the minutes are secure yet, but it seems like the most likely scenario is him getting 30, 32 minutes off the bench, and there's obviously some real appeal there. Josh Jackson is fine in just about anything. Certainly wouldn't force him into anything. Someone asked me if he was a must-play in cash. Nothing close to that. The $5,100 price on FanDuel is nice. He's still droppable, kind of at that price. And $1,600 over the floor, but $2,600 over the floor, paying $5,600 on DraftKings. You need a good game out of him, and it's not the most thrilling environment. So it makes sense in a game stack, just fine to play in a tournament, but appears to be oversold by a lot of people. Josh Jackson has a real ability to look shitty. And then if you think this game goes sideways, Kelly Oubre, one of the players who makes sense. Rashawn Holmes, probably the other one. And yeah, again, DeAndre Ayton, they played the 2 games this year. The first time, which was like the first week of the season, went into Denver, and he looked terrible, and Jokic clowned him pretty well. And then in the second game, just a couple weeks ago, he had like 55 fantasy points. That was I believe he shot 16 for 20 from the field in that game, but handled himself very well and has been, on the resurgent recently. So just tournaments, but certainly no issue with DeAndre Ayton in that aspect. Let's talk about the Nuggets, which is a good bit more complicated. Again, looking for news, which I would like to hear, and I don't have. I think Gary Harris plays. Again, there was a shoot around, and based on all the chatter I've seen, I'll go 3-1 that he plays, a 75-25 that he gets there and plays. You can argue it's more likely they give Barton a few minutes in this situation because it is an easier opponent and they just want him to start getting his feet wet. I'm not going to play Barton regardless unless somehow we get news that he is going to play, and they expect him to play 20 minutes is the first time I'd start considering it, and that would be just the DraftKings price where he's $5,000 on the nose, like $6,700 on FanDuel. We've got to wait until we can deploy that there. But obviously what we're talking about here is the more of these questionable guys that play, and really it's Harrison Barton. Trey Lyles doesn't matter that much unless you're looking at Juancho, Jokic a little bit, Millsap, that entire scenario. So start at the beginning, a very good place to start. Jokic, a stellar play with massive upside, regardless of any of the rest of this. Had 80-something, I think. I'm going to check. I want to look these things up. I keep talking about this. Let me download a couple of my box scores because I could be remembering something wrong. All right, box 1, October 20th, so it was the first week of the season. Played in Denver. I said none of the Suns were good. Devin Booker at 37.5 on DK. No one else exceeded 25.5, which was Isaiah Canaan. Remember him? Then you looked at the Nuggets, and 81.25 out of Jokic. Yeah, that's about what I remember. 40-something out of Jamal Murray, 36 out of Gary Harris, 35 out of Paul Millsap. And then get the second game, which I think was the crazy Jamal Murray game. In Phoenix, 122 to 118 in regulation in that game, so 240 in regulation, a nice number to see there. And again, 52 on DraftKings out of Nikola Jokic, and Jamal Murray with a hot 70 burger. That was his 46 real point game. So let's go back and talk about this game a little bit. So I obviously like both those guys for the upside they portend. Jamal Murray, another guy who is just too cheap on FanDuel at 7,300. He's 74 on DK, which is a little closer. Now, He's probably about appropriately priced for a neutral opponent if Gary Harris is back in. Because, again, the minutes, you're going to end up with more 30, 32-minute totals because Harris is out there and they're still giving Monty Morris his run as the backup point, and there's no reason to go crazy. But if you have Gary Harris out and you're playing against the Suns, that's still a fine number. And, again, as I just intimated, there's obviously a big upside to be had there. So I would have no issue with Jamal Murray in your life. He goes from being a fine tournament play if Gary Harris is in to being a very, very solid tournament play if Gary Harris is out. Gary Harris himself at 5,000 on FanDuel, I'm a pretty big fan of. I think he's going to start. I think he's going to play. And I think he's going to get, as many minutes as the game situation portends, which, should be 30, 32 minutes for him. So 5,000 against the Suns. I'm a pretty big fan. By all means, is it a quad? Let me look at it. Is it quad or a hammy? Hammy! There you go. So I have a feeling he looked good during his warm-ups Thursday. They didn't play yesterday. Yeah, Thursday. They didn't play yesterday. And I think he gives it a go here. So a little nervous to do it on non-late swap sites right now. But if we get news, before lock or news post-lock on late swap sites that Gary Harris is in, I like him at his price quite a bit. The more dudes that are out, we can look at Torrey Craig again in a fine spot. I like him on FanDuel where he's droppable at only, 4,300. Again, you want Harris out. It's the difference between him playing 26 or 27 minutes and 34 or 35 minutes. Like him more on FanDuel because it's droppable, obviously, but not out of play on DK. But you really want Gary Harris and Will Barton out. If you have Barton back in, it's a little bit of a cookie steal from everybody. It's well worse for Craig, bit worse for Harris, bit worse for Murray, bit worse for Jokic. He's just a guy who does a lot with the ball and is just going to take evenly from everywhere else. I like Paul Millsap, absolutely fine in tournaments. Probably do better in cash somewhere, but I think he gets 30 minutes. I think he's good for a little more than a fantasy point a minute. So at a price in the sixes, you're needing to hit 40 to get some sort of tournament upside. I think it's more likely you get 30 or 35 here, but no issue with any exposure to Paul Millsap. If you have no Harris and no Barton, then I'm a pretty big fan of Malik Beasley, who's only 3,900 on FanDuel, so you can throw him in there now. Hope you get lucky on both those bits of news, and he's not dead if you miss it. With Murray, I would prefer Beasley this time straight up to Monty Morris, which I've gone back and forth on throughout the year. And last guy, don't completely sleep on Mason Plumlee. Again, you want more guys out, although it affects him less directly. Probably plays 18 to 20 minutes, but 4,500 on FanDuel. Power forward eligible, I think, still. I'll double check because I have FanDuel up on screen number 3. He's back to center. They've moved him around a bit. But 4,500 certainly a value center play you could look at there. We'll look at other cheap centers. Gorgie Jang obviously would be superior if we got that news. As of right now, I'd probably rather Pau Gasol. I'd probably rather Bismack Biyombo too. Biyombo has big game fueled by defensive stat upside. And if you had the $400, I would rather Willie Hernan-Gomez again, but we will get to that game in a second. That's quite a long time. Pau Gasol starting. Who could have foreseen such a thing? To be honest, he started last game, so that's not that crazy. But $3,100 on DK, yeah, I'll go with 19 minutes, 20 and a half DraftKings points. Pretty sure if I ran it through, that's about what I would come with. I like the individual matchup with Steven Adams. I don't like the matchup so much as it's not a matchup that overly concerns me with his skill set and his ability to do a lot of things. Neuters your rebounds a little bit, but the way that works in the high post helps with his assist upside, a couple other things. So 3,100, I can get behind that. I believe 10 on Yahoo, I would think. That's fine to try in a tournament, but 10 on Yahoo is a very, very low floor, and you actually have a much higher standard of what you want to get out of your players at that price because of how jacked the scoring is. Let me go here and check that, and we got that, and refresh this, and we'll go on to another game. Dude, no one will be rested for the Spurs. That's good. Again, I'm 99% sure they're not on a back-to-back. Let me go look at my handy-dandy scheduler. They're not, so this would have been a weird rest spot. But Rudy Gay is still out. I'm thinking it's all over when I go out drinking. 2 10 p.m. games. The Bulls and the Jazz. 1 second, let me caffeinate. Let us continue. God, I haven't looked at... have to think the Jazz are favored by somewhere around a 10 spot here. So yeah, Royce O'Neal. Been talking about back since before he didn't start. So he's fine to play in anything. He played 40 minutes last game. That's probably on the high side, even if you just take into account the possibility of a blowout here. This is a bad Chicago team, that can lose games by 40 and have several times. Maybe they keep this game close, but, on the road in Utah, all the elevation, all that, very real chance that they get destroyed. So I still have Royce O'Neal projected for 35 minutes. I still have him projected for 23.5 fantasy points. That's, just a fine number. He's obviously exceptional on FanDuel, where he's the absolute minimum. Still, he's 3,500, and you can drop him. DK is 3,900. Now, I've heard a couple people say today, like, last game was, the upside game. That's the best you're going to do. No, not really. He can do steals and blocks, and again, he played 40 minutes and had like 32 fantasy points. So that's 0.8 fantasy points a minute. That's not a ceiling. That's better than average. I will grant that. Career-wise, he's a bit under a 0.7 fantasy point a minute guy, and that's a reasonable expectation. But you can get 2 steals and a block out of him in a game and end up with a little bit better. But point being, cash, yes. FanDuel, yes. Tournaments, I'm probably more inclined to go elsewhere. Let me see if we have an ownership update. Did I must have hit something wrong, because yeah, there we go. I hit projections. When I saw Marco Bellinelli on the top, I suspected that he was not the most popular owned player tonight. Yet we do have an update that came in, and again, if you're not a member of Osmo.com, in a world where basketball is really, really predictable, and there's about 500 people with really nice projections as far as production goes, manipulating and getting around ownership is maybe completely necessary to be a profitable player. If not, it's really close, and these are the best ownership projections I have ever seen. So, big fan. Karl Anthony Towns, now the chalkiest player on the slate for us at 30%. And he's good. He's 9,900 on DK. We have to presume he's close to 100%. So, certainly not surprising there. Rounding out the top 5, Anthony Davis, Derek Favors, which maybe I missed some news. That seems a little strange for me. I don't mind Derek Favors, but I would rather Jay Crowder at his price. Budrick Hield, Russell Westbrook, and then Royce O'Neal coming in 6th at 20%. So I'm fairly ambivalent on that. I'm very meh. If you want to play him in a tournament at 3,900, yeah, he's going to be more popular than any of the other value largely. But he does have an upside beyond what we saw, and it's not like a matchup with the Bulls is overly concerning, and if it stays close, he's going to play 40 minutes, and getting 35 out of him wouldn't shock me, and could easily be the best value on the slate. So, meh. But, not super upside guy, to be sure. So, make your own decisions and correlate with your lineups as well as possible. So I guess let's talk about, Derek Favors. Gets generally most days in that 25 to 28 minute range, and is a guy who carries some upside. And the price has come down precipitously on DraftKings. It's 51, I want to say. That would make some sense. Yeah, and 51 against the Bulls, which is certainly a front court that hemorrhages all kinds of offensive production. Let me see if I have any relevant notes to this. Pause just 1 minute, please. This is why I hate doing a show by myself. If I want to do some research or check some news or something in the middle of the show, I have to try to babble like an idiot to stop us having dead air while it goes. He's got a check mark. Okay, so very little in my notes. But, yeah, it's a fine matchup, obviously, against the Bulls. And Lauri Markkanen, but just the team in general. So I think that's fine. He's obviously going to be somewhat popular, and it's hardly locked in stone there and is not going to be playing in a blowout. But if you're looking to take significant pieces of this game, if you're running it back with some Bulls, whether or not you're running, I suppose, Zach LaVine or Chris Dunn or Lauri Markkanen being the three most popular pieces, if you were to play the Bulls, certainly Derek Favors makes sense as a guy who, you can get 40 out of Derek Favors, and as a spot you could do it in, so he would be a good part of any game stack. Rudy Gobert is still too cheap on FanDuel. He's 82 on DraftKings. That makes sense. That's about right. He's 84 on FanDuel. That number should be closer to about 9K. There's a massive ceiling here. He's probably my favorite cash center. Yeah, I mean, I would certainly in cash rather play him for a slightly lower upside than run out 10-5 or whatever Karl Towns is. I'll save $2,000. Ingles obviously makes some sense. Now priced a little better on FanDuel as opposed to DK, basically the same price both sites. Just ends up having a much higher assist upside, touches the ball, handles the ball a lot more. Donovan Mitchell, much stronger on FanDuel, again, who just most of the Jazz ended up better there, except for Favors, somewhat randomly. He'll also start. Sometimes the algorithms get thrown off by a guy who's starting, guy who's not starting, but he still should be flagged as the starter everywhere, though maybe it looks at more minutes per position or something weird. But 81 on FanDuel still makes a lot of sense. Again, you're betting on this game staying close, and I do think it's important to have some sort of narrative there. Do you think these guys play 3 quarters or 4 quarters? $8,100 Donovan Mitchell, if he's going to play 4 quarters against the Bulls, yeah, I like that number a lot. If he's going to play 3, I'd certainly rather not have any, especially if he's going to be popular. Certainly well in play on DK at 8,500, on the borderline of a cash play at that point. Jay Crowder certainly makes some sense in tournaments. He's going to play his usually 27, 29 minutes or so. He's priced under 5K. Same caveats, basically. And I suppose if I'm going beyond that, it's probably FanDuel droppable Kyle Korver, but really no need to go beyond the gentleman we have talked about so far. Let's go ahead and 4 minutes to go. Sacramento and Charlotte. I didn't realize I had trundled so late. So Kemba Walker, excellent, close to a cash game play, just fine to play in tournaments. I like Jeremy Lamb a lot, especially if you're not playing Kemba Walker. If you want to run it back with De'Aaron Fox or something, I like Jeremy Lamb a lot. You can do Nick Batum in tournaments. It's fine, but it's never a good thing, but it works fine in tournaments. Biyombo on FanDuel, Willie on DraftKings. Willie is just tournaments, but if you go back and look, he's scored more than a fantasy point a minute 7 of his last 8 games, and the other one was at a fantasy point a minute. He's a really productive fantasy basketball player against the Kings. There is a massive upside there. No, Tony Parker is sitting. A little more interested in Malik Monk then. Obviously just tournaments. Certainly something you could do. Marvin Williams, I don't think I would get to it. A little low upside for a tournament and little specious for cash, but matchup is obviously as good as it's going to get. Price on De'Aaron Fox is appropriate or even a little bit high, so just tournaments for me based on the number. Buddy Hield down at 6,500 is more attractive at that DK price. Mon Shumpert is a FanDuel punt. I think that we are still on questionable Bogdan Bogdanovic. If we get news that he is not going to play, can be a little more comfortable with Shumpert, but the first guy I'd want to go to in tournaments would be Justin Jackson. His minutes would project closer to 30 at that point, so if we get news that Bogdanovic doesn't play, Justin Jackson, the first guy I would want to go to there. If we get news he does play, Bogdanovic himself at very reduced ownership, I like on a smaller slate. Certainly an upside there. Strategy question, is there a minimum number of shares of a guy you need to have in order to make rostering them worth it? No, because they're differentiated up into, there's no problem with rostering a guy in 1 out of 150 lineups. Yeah, there's because they exist in individual lineups, there is no minimum requirement to make each share valuable. There is it would most largely affect your time. You and I and most people aren't capable of micromanaging, even if an algorithm or Cruncher or whatever generates those 150 lineups. When you're dealing with single shares, it is less likely that you will have the industry, the auspices, and the time to effectively manage them. So you could argue that they're less valuable for that reason, but that comes into a process question. It depends on you and exactly how you're doing it and whether or not you're playing 150 or 25 lineups where it's much easier to handle a single share. So there's a lot. Holmes and Ayton negatively correlate? Yes. You want a blowout for Holmes. You want Ayton to get foul trouble for Holmes. You want any number of things. So yes, Holmes and Ayton massively negatively correlate as much as almost any two players you are going to find. Making a last news check. Sorry for getting a little late before I got to the Kings there, but I don't believe I had any super hot takes. So there are times that I realize it's 6:53 and I have a massive, you must play this guy or don't play this guy in the last game. And then, yeah, I feel like a real asshole. Because it's like, oh, hey, probably should have mentioned that at some point before 6:57. I have no such news on this evening's slate, or certainly in the late game. Looking then, still no news on G Money Gary Harris. People like Monk today. Yeah, I think I'm fine with that. Do. Alright, here we go. I am not seeing anything. No significant overlay to speak of. Alright, we will do some daddy-like when this sucker kicks off in 3 seconds, apparently. And we are at lock. Did I mention Bogdanović was questionable? I did! He's questionable. If he plays, I like Bogdanović. If he doesn't play, I like Justin Jackson as the immediate pivot with a bit of an upside kick for Healed. Shumpert might pick up a few extra minutes. Bielitsa, they could flow down to as well. All right, let's look at what should be some not incredibly compelling ownerships, but since I've got you all here, may as well take some time and see what is up. So let's see what's the largest tournament on DraftKings that my buddy is in here. There appears to be a $200,000 pull-up jumper. So go ahead and let's take a look at the ownerships in there. Yeah, no, I have no problem with anyone double checking. Did you remember to mention something with me any number of times if you're being constructive? So I am far from perfect, and anything that I might be resembling perfect goes way down when I'm here by myself because you're managing talking and looking at other things, and it's Josh has been on a couple times this year up to lock by himself while playing, and that seems like a dreadful situation. I regret putting him into that. All right, let us see what we have here. Number one owned player, 16% Nick Vucevic at $8,800. I'm fine with that. That's about where that number should be. A little bit more of a cashy play again for me because, you know, you're spending $9,000 on him. You want to have some exposure to like a 55-point upside. That's a little dicey there. Evan Fournier, 15%. That's higher than I thought it would be. He's 4,700 again, so hard to imagine it'll hurt you too much. But again, we are talking about a guy with 3 fantasy points in his last game. Aaron Gordon, 10.5%. Yeah, it's really interesting what happened to sort of stall his player development. I don't know how much of it is physical issues, the focus of the offense just moving to Vooch, and Vooch's improvement, taking the shine off him indirectly, if unintentionally. But he was, you know, getting more athletic and more coordinated. His handle was getting better. He developed a really good three-point shot for a while there, and just I don't know what happened to Aaron Gordon, but price is coming down to the point where he makes a fine tournament play, though again, Celtics makes you a little Jonathan Isaac, really cheap. Another guy I thought would make more of a leap this year. At the beginning of the year, Summer League, this was someone we really had our eyes on and hasn't really advanced that much. 5.6 play. Al Horford at 5.5% owned. Big fan of that at 5,600. If he now could play up to 30 minutes, I don't like the matchup with Vooch. I'd project him for like 30 minutes and 30 fantasy points, right about on the nose. But, certainly some merit there. Just at the fact that 5% ownership on what's not a giant slate. Jason Tatum, 5%. Marcus Morris, 5%. Again, much better on FanDuel. You're saving literally like $1,000 off of DK prices. Very nice. Kyrie Irving, 4.5%. I'm going to like that every day that he's that low on. There's big upside there. Augustine, 3.5. Meh. Jaylen Brown, 3.4. I like that. Terrence Frost, 3.3. Meh. Terry Rozier, 2.3. Marcus Smart, 1.8. Gordon Hayward, 1.25. Kem Birch, who I guess I should have mentioned and didn't. I left him in my tournament rankings just based on if you think this game blows out. And with Mo Bamba not currently playing, Kem Birch would get all that blowout time and will be in the rotation regardless as a backup. So he also at close to minimum price was in that sort of Pau Gasol category of, yeah, that's something you could do if you wanted to. Don Simmons, 0.8. Okay. Daniel Tice, 0.45. Sure. Robert Williams, 0.2. Okay, I think he's back with the team. Wes Iwundu, 0.04. Briscoe, 0.03. Is there anyone? I don't think there's any congratulations, you played yourself. I think all these guys are actually with the team. I think they are. I think they may all play. I want to check. There's a chance that this team is... Again, it's only one game. And there may not have been really anyone on the teams that you could have selected. Oh, wait. Nope. Someone got a share of Aaron Baines, who is still out. Aaron Baines, congratulations. You played yourself. Whew! That had me nervous. So I will be back again tomorrow. Good luck to those of you who participated in some of the pigskin contests today. Thanks to everyone who reported news in during the show to help me with my job. Rest assured, I do not take you for granted. Likewise, thank you to everyone who had... kind words for me on the passing of my dog of 15 years just the day before yesterday under pretty horrid circumstances. So, again, many thanks. And that is that. I will be back again tomorrow. I will be here, I think, the next 9 or 10 days in a row because Daddy likes that the NBA has really... there are no less than 6... I think there are no less than 6 games in a day until a week from tomorrow. Something like that. So I'm probably going to truck through all those 8 days because I don't want to take a 6-gamer off if I can avoid it. So that is the plan. If you have any questions or comments about late swap, late slates, anything like that, go ahead and send me a tweet or hit me up in the premium Slack chat. Goodbye now.